this project has reached both its political and physical limits now. With political, I'm already referring to the fact that there have been no negotiations with any meaningful results. But there is also another thing. But what I mean with physical is that we should not overlook the fact that this experiment in state building is taking place in 40% of the West Bank. Fayyad doesn't control Gaza for reasons which I certainly am not blaming you. That's their own internal divide. But 60% of the West Bank is not under his control. It remains under IDF control. And I have to say, in all honesty, that we, of course, what we're seeing there is also an ongoing project. It's another project. It's the settlement project, which, whether you like it or not, you cannot square with what I have just been describing to you, that if the two-state solution is in the best interests of both Israel and the Palestinians, then something wrong, there is something fundamentally wrong here. This is the situation in which we find ourselves now. At the same time, you cannot, of course, overlook what is happening around you. We have, since the beginning of the year, we have what is now called either the Arab Spring, if you want to be very positive about it. Some refer to it as an Arab awakening. It is clear that this is a situation around you which will affect you. And I also understand that many of you are also concerned about how this could end in the different countries in which these demonstrations take place. But let's not lose sight of what is actually happening. I wish also to tell you that the Secretary General from the beginning has taken the position that Arab leaders will have to respond to the legitimate aspirations of their people. That is what this is all about, these democratic revolutions. They are not so much inspired by Iran or by the more fundamentalist parts in this society, which are present, of course, which can always, if these things are going the wrong way, can also become the winners in such a situation. But it doesn't have to be like this. And for the United Nations, what is happening around you is very much about our own values. It's about democracy, about giving people fair chances. It is all about the very principles of the United Nations. If you also, some of you may remember that there has been that the United Nations is also issuing United Nations development reports, usually drawn up by experts from the different regions. Consistently, these reports have been telling everybody that all these countries, in whatever indicator, whether it was governance or corruption, they were always on the wrong side of these indicators. So it was almost something which was, in my view, bound to happen. Now, what you have seen also, of course, more recently, before I go to September, is that Palestinians have now decided, maybe I say, because they have only decided at least their intentions to end their division. That happened in Cairo not so long ago. Now again, for the United Nations, we look at this in principle as a positive development, provided it is shaped in the right way. And what do I mean with that? That the well-known quartet principles, which means that any Palestinian government has to be based on acceptance of Israel's right to exist, renouncement of violence, and acceptance also of previous agreements, that any Palestinian government will have to be set up in the framework of these principles, which, by the way, are the same as the PLO commitments, the existing PLO commitments. So if it happens, I tell you, that a government will be set up according to these principles, if it happens that they will also decide to have a competent leadership for such a government, and you may understand to whom I have in mind, then I don't think that we should be a priori so negative about this. I wish to remind you, why am I stressing that these quartet principles are pertaining rather to a government than to the movements? Not that I don't want Hamas also to change and accept these things. But look at your own situation. You have inside your own government also people who are opposed to a two-state solution. I heard your Speaker of Parliament saying something about not giving up an inch of Greater Israel. What in the end is relevant for the international community is the program of governments, the program of the Israeli governments, the program of a Palestinian government, and their commitments to negotiate in good faith, to reach a peaceful outcome on the basis of a two-state solution. That is what the international community is trying to achieve, on which I can also assure you the international community has never been more united actually than before. Don't forget also that the international community is not only saying this, but also helping it to achieve. After all, this project I have been referring to has been supported by donors, by the international community, with large sums of money. This cannot continue just ad infinitum. And now I come to September. I've just been describing all this to you. Some positive developments, many difficulties, challenges and risks. If you look at the regional situation, at Palestinian unity, I'm not. If I were you, I would also not be convinced that unity would actually or can be shaped in such a way that it will strengthen the two-state solution rather than strengthen Hamas. These are legitimate worries on your side. But still, if we now look at the situation, if nothing would change in the present situation, we have, on the one hand, an impressive bottom-up development, which, as I have been warning you, cannot be just continued the way it is. It has reached its political and physical limits. If we then go to September, with no negotiations, with the Palestinians determined to actually then go to the United Nations and ask for their state to become a member of the United Nations, then yes, this may end not very well, so to say. Let me first tell you what it means going to the United Nations. What it means is that any state or any other state can actually propose that a state be admitted to the United Nations, provided that that state is then in a declaration to the Secretary General confirming that it will abide by all the principles in the Charter of the United Nations. That's a formality. So that's a letter to the Secretary General. The Secretary General will pass that letter on to the Security Council. The Security Council will form a committee. That committee has, I believe, 3 weeks to discuss the request. And then it will have to send a recommendation to the General Assembly. So, very importantly, states can only be admitted to the United Nations upon a recommendation by the Security Council. Now, if things don't change as they are now, it is not very likely that the Security Council will reach consensus on what to advise to the General Assembly. In that case, it is still possible for the General Assembly, under a so-called Uniting for Peace procedure, to actually take up the matter and then pass a resolution, which, by the way, can only recommend that states will recognize a Palestinian state. So very clearly, I want to be very clear about the procedure. Only through a recommendation of the Security Council this is possible for Palestine to become a member of the United Nations. Well, all things can happen in September, and I hope you will understand also that as a member of, as a representative of the Secretary General, I can't advise any of the states what they will decide to do in their own wisdom. I, in a way, work for all those states, including Israel. That's a fascinating job, I can tell you. But what I am worried about is that if it would lead to inconclusive outcomes, with no real changes on the ground, no prospect of actually real negotiations to resolve the outstanding final status issues which have to be resolved to actually move forward towards a two-state solution, that of course that could then backfire. backfire, in particular, given the very turbulent situation in the region, the aspirations of the Palestinians. And that could then also backfire on you. It could then also mean that afterwards there can be more tension here on the ground. There could be, it is of course also possible that many more states than states have already done will recognize such a Palestinian state, including maybe some European states. This is not a good scenario. We all know it. And that's why the Secretary General and I are telling everybody at this stage that it is far better for the parties to return to negotiations and clearly start doing what still needs to be done to complement the impressive progress which has been made on the ground in terms of preparing for a two-state solution. Now, this is easier said than done. I can tell you that I'm in fact also a bit frustrated as a representative of the quartet and of the international community that the international community hasn't been able to come forward with a proper initiative acceptable to the parties. But what I want to leave with you is the urgency of all of this. I feel that you are wrong if you think that you can discuss these issues for time to come. No, I feel that if it is not working now, it will be even more difficult to try again another time. Of course, there are other solutions. If you decide, as I hear sometimes, to annex the West Bank, then you have one state. But that is then also a situation where you will have to. The international community will be looking at you in terms of whether you are then giving all citizens of that state equal rights. So these are very difficult choices, I think, ahead for you. I can assure you that as the United Nations, within the remit which I get from my Secretary General and from the Security Council, that I am determined to help both parties to find the right way forward and not backwards. Thank you.